Sometimes I find myself sitting back and thinking about all the life events that have brought me to where I am right now. Maybe you've done the same thing. I look around me and I think about the opportunities I've been given to make a difference in the world. And it's kind of mind-boggling to think of all the things that have brought me to this place, this sacred and holy place in my life. There has been unbelievable good fortune in my life, as well as challenges I never would have thought I would have to face. Sometimes I made some really good choices, but I've also made my share of bad choices. But everything, both the good and the tragic, has been woven together into a tapestry that is my life and has left me in a surprisingly good position for making a difference in the world. I have to imagine that's how Moses must have felt following his encounter with God on Mount Horeb. As he looked back on his life experiences that had led up to this place of bare feet and burning bushes, Moses must have also been struck by the series of events that had led him to this place in our text that our text describes as beyond the wilderness. But for us to understand how he ended up beyond the wilderness, we have to go back to his life before the wilderness. In fact, we have to go all the way back to his birth. Moses had been born at a very dangerous time for people like him. He was born a Hebrew in a time and place where Hebrews weren't valued as human beings. In fact, their lives were a living hell. They were mistreated by the Egyptians and even hunted down and killed. If you are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, this might strike a chord with you. But if you are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, and you are 65 years or older, it probably really hits home for you. Because if you are from that age group, you lived in even more dangerous times than we live today. Hunting LGBT folk down and beating them senseless was a pastime, a sporting event, one that even the police participated in. If convicted of being gay, your name was published in newspapers and you immediately lost your job and you became unemployable. They were tough and difficult times. And so people before the 70s did what Moses did. And they did what, unfortunately, many people still feel compelled to do today. They lived their lives in closets, pretending to be someone who they really weren't. Closets are places where we pretend to be straight, even though we know deep down inside that we really aren't. We act and talk and look like everyone around us, hoping that no one will guess our true identity, because if they do, we are certain bad things will happen to us. Closets are where we rationalize that it's better to be living a lie and alive than it is to be true to ourselves and put ourselves at risk. Moses lived his early years in a closet. Although he was Hebrew, he was raised as an Egyptian. And not just any old Egyptian, but an Egyptian of privilege. As long as he was able to hide his identity, he could live a life of entitlement, free of any persecution. As long as he remained in his closet, he was able to walk the streets and never worry what others said or thought about him. But life in the closet is not a life of freedom. In fact, it's not much of a life at all. Moses thought he could work within the system. He saw how his tribe was being treated, and it broke his heart. He thought he could stand up for them while holding on to his Egyptian privilege. But he discovered differently. As the Bible describes it, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinsfolk. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Moses probably felt the exhilaration from the adrenaline flowing through his veins, knowing he had actually risked his reputation and life of privilege for his people. But in the end, he discovered that his people weren't nearly as grateful as he thought they would be. You see, they turned their back on him because as long as he could slip back into his life of closeted privilege while his own people continued to experience persecution, they were unwilling to claim him as one of their own. So here he was in the awful place of living a lie on the one hand, knowing he really wasn't Egyptian, and rejected by his Hebrew community on the other hand because he was unwilling to come out of the closet. The closet is an awful place. It's a dark and lonely place. A place where you feel caught between identities, which can be a very painful experience. And so Moses did the only thing he could think of to do, and that was to run away. He told himself that he was running away from the law, but in reality he was running away from himself. And he ran as far as he could go until he found himself in the wilderness. Members of the LGBT community often find ourselves in our own wildernesses, don't we? Our wildernesses are spiritual wildernesses made up of addiction and eating disorders. In our wildernesses, we trade our bodies for favors, and we try to convince ourselves that those favors are love and affection. Our wildernesses are replete with depression and attempted suicides, some of which are successful. Our wildernesses are not like Moses' wilderness of wild animals and dry and arid soil conditions, but they are just as deadly to our spirits. They are the back alleys and the secret places where sexual favors are exchanged in moments of desperation, leaving each other satisfied for the time being, but empty in the long run. That's what the wildernesses of the LGBT community look like. But somehow Moses escaped his wilderness. Some of us do. Some of us lose our way and find ourselves stuck in our wilderness, but some of us manage to escape. We are the lucky ones. Moses was one of the lucky ones. He had settled down in the land of Midian, met someone, and begun to make a family. He was employed by his father-in-law, and this morning we find him content with life, hanging out on what our text describes as the mountain of God, beyond the wilderness. Moses would have been happy to have forgotten his former life. In fact, he was doing his best to do just that. He was building a new life for himself in this land beyond the wilderness. But it was a life in which he stopped his ears to the cries of his people as they continued to suffer in Egypt. It was a life in which he pretended that he was in no way connected to their misery. But God would not let him be. Even as Moses tried to create his new life that was disconnected from everything that was happening in Egypt, God tracked him down and wouldn't let Moses forget or deny his roots or the suffering of his own people. I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings. And so God assigned Moses the task of helping the Israelites to escape from Egypt to this mountain of God. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain. You see, as wonderful as it is that you and I may have narrowly escaped the darkness of our closets and the dangers of our wildernesses, that's not enough. There are still people, a lot of people, who aren't as fortunate as we are. God calls us, like God called Moses, to not become so satisfied in our settled lives that we stop our ears to the pain and suffering of our tribe. We have been called to help others escape their closets and wildernesses and lead them to a place of freedom. A place where we are free to be who we are, free to worship God in our own skins, free to live and love the way God always intended for us. It's a good place, this place beyond the wilderness. God calls us to this place. And it's up to us, to you and me, to see that others find their ways to it. May each of us hear the voice of God calling to us out of burning bushes. May we each answer the call to lead others to this mountain of God that lies in the land beyond the wilderness. May we hear the calls of our tribe and respond with love and compassion. And in so doing, may we answer God's call to make a difference. Amen.